you've been paying close attention to where we are at this point in the course, you'll know that a really heavy theme has been the development of American political thought, where it came from, how it evolved, where we get our start, and a lot of these things that make up the core principles of American democracy. That theme will continue here today, but like anything else in history, there's a lot of cause and effect in the dynamic that's involved with all of this. That's where I want to begin with um, with what more and more historians are calling the Great War for Empire. Um, I'd like you to understand this Great War for Empire was very global in its scope. It is seen in North America, but it encompasses more than simply North America. But generally speaking, what the Great War for Empire does involve is the British squaring off against the French for colonial global supremacy. Again, you see this in North America, but you also see it in places like Africa. You see it in the Middle East, you see it in the Far East, you see it in the Caribbean. It's very much global in its context. However, for the purposes of our class, it's obviously most important in the North American context. And in North America, what this conflict is typically referred to as is the French-Indian War, which is kind of confusing considering it's not really the French fighting the Indians, as it might sound. It's the French and their Native American allies that are facing off against the British. I want to begin with explaining who's fighting on what side and why. It should be said that the British did have their Native American allies. That was certainly true, but the French had many, many more. And that poses the question, why? Why is it that so many Native Americans wanted to see the French win this war as opposed to the British? And the answer is relatively simple. Um, there were not nearly as many French colonists as there were English colonists. We know that one of the things that really distinguished the English colonies was the fact that they had established very populated colonies, and the French just never were able to do that for whatever reason. So if you're doing the math and you're connecting the dots, you happen to be Native American here, you're watching this situation play out, and you realize that if the French win, you've got a much, much greater chance to hang on to your ancestral homeland as opposed to the British. Caught in the middle of this are going to be the American colonists, okay? And that's where I want to begin our conversation. The guy running Parliament at this particular moment, let's call it 1753, 1754, is a guy by the name of William Pitt. And William Pitt is really going to be the architect, the designer of this Great War for Empire, and that includes the North American context. What he wants is expansion. Keep in mind, Great Britain is the workshop of the world. It's the industrial capital of the world. And the more and more territories that they come to dominate, the more and more they can feed their industry. And certainly that applies to North America as well. In North America, what we're really fighting for would be the Ohio River Valley. Think of that land that is west of the Appalachian Mountains, what would become Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, that region. Now, that region is claimed by both the British and the French. Both of them really thought of it as their future territories. And this is really what the fight is going to emerge over in North America. Now, William Pitt knows that he's got a numerical disadvantage facing him. He knows that the Native Americans and their French allies outnumber them. He's got to find some way to even out the numbers. And that's where the colonists come into play. I want to make sure that you understand this. Those individuals in the colonies of Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, etc., they are British subjects. They are subject to the same laws, the same taxation codes, the same everything. And so if William Pitt really wanted to, what he could do is he could just force the issue and say, you guys are serving, and there's no two ways about that. I'm not going to take any questions. Thank you very much, and I expect you to report 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. He doesn't do that. You've heard that old adage, you can get more flies with honey than you can vinegar. That's kind of the approach that William Pitt is going to employ here in 1754 to recruit the colonists. On the one hand, what he's going to say is, look out west. Look at all that valuable farmland. You can go out west if we win this war, and you can take advantage. You can make all this money on that valuable farmland. But I'm not going to force the issue with you. Ultimately, this is going to be your decision, colonists. And I want you to think long and hard about this. I want you to get yourself together at Albany, New York, in what will become known as the Albany Congress, and I want you to discuss the prospects, weigh the pros and cons when it comes to participation in this war. We would very much love to have you, but I'm not going to force the issue with you. So all of the colonies send their delegates to Albany in what comes to be known as the Albany Congress. And ultimately what they do is they decide that they will in fact participate in the war. They will come in on behalf of the British. And this is hugely instrumental because what it's going to do is it's going to even up the advantage that the French had initially had. It's going to be very, very important. But understand something. They're doing so, one primary reason is because they really do want access to that Western territory. Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, that region, okay? So they're not stupid, and they're not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. The second thing that I want you to understand here is what William Pitt is doing, whether he realizes this or not. He is implying that the colonists are in charge, that what the colonists decide is ultimately more important than what Britain, the mother country, says. And this is going to set a dangerous precedent for the British government because, on the one hand, there was at least a 100-year history of this happening. We know that the British were very much encouraging people to come over, and one of the things that they did in that way was pretty much say, you can do your own thing when you get over here. If that's religious freedom, then that's fine. If that's self-representative government, then that's fine. American political thought traces its roots much, much earlier than many people believe, primarily because the British were trying to do everything that they could to encourage people to come over. The Albany Congress reinforces this idea that the American colonists are in charge, and it's not the other way around. But for our purposes, I want to move on and talk about a very important person within the context of the French Indian War, and that be General George Washington. Captain George Washington. From a very early age, what Washington wanted to be was an officer in the British military, and the British pulled no punches when it comes to you're not good enough, and the reason that you're not good enough is that you were born in the colonies. That makes you a second-class citizen, and we will never accept you into the military, not as a British officer anyway. What they do for him in this period is they do the next best thing, and they commission him as the commander of the Virginia Regiment. And Washington is going to be sent to scout the Ohio River Valley. This is 1753, before the bullets start flying. And ultimately, the French capture him. And in many ways, ransoming him back, getting George Washington back, is really going to be instrumental in the causation of the war. It's going to set into play many trends that will ultimately lead into a declaration of war. But most importantly of all, Major George Washington is going to gain some valuable military experience in the leadership of the Virginia Regiment. Now, the reason I tell you that is pretty simple. On the cusp of the American Declaration of Independence, there was really one guy in all of the colonies that knew a thing or two about military science, and that was George Washington. It's this military experience that he gains during the French Indian War, fighting on behalf of the British, that really develops him into a capable military leader, and that's obviously going to have important consequences later on in the 1770s with the American Revolution. But for right now, what I'll say about the war is this. The longer you take this class, the more and more you're going to understand that I don't really do war per se, but we do need to understand how this thing plays itself out. The Americans essentially evened the balance of advantage that the French had, and they were very important in turning the tide, okay? Without the American colonists' participation, there's a very good chance that we would be speaking French right now. They were very important, and more importantly, they knew they were very important. They knew how instrumental of a role they had played in providing that manpower, providing the supplies, providing the shelter in a lot of cases. They played a very important role. And in the end, the British are going to win this war. They're going to win the war. They will reduce the French presence in the Western Hemisphere to a collection of islands in the Caribbean. For the French, this was a humiliating defeat, and they were chomping at the bit to return the favor, if you know what I mean. But more importantly, what that does is it gives the British access to the Ohio River Valley, those western territories that we were talking about just a minute ago. Britain wins. This is an important point, but it also takes on an enormous amount of debt. It had borrowed an enormous amount of money to defeat the French, and although they were very happy that they had won the war, somebody's going to have to deal with this debt in the immediate aftermath. And that might not seem like it right now, but believe me, that's going to play a very important role in the coming of the American Revolution. Right now, I want to talk a little bit about the aftermath of the French-Indian War. In addition to the Ohio River Valley, the British took the rest of the French colonies in North America, including what would become Canada. The Quebec province of Canada was one point in time a French colony, and with that French colony, what the British got were French colonists. I tell you that because it's important to know that there are people that don't exactly like the British over there, and maybe they might have a bright idea when it comes to rebelling against British authority. Furthermore, we know that most Native Americans, not all, but most, did side with the French, wanted the French to win the war. They're not super happy about such a British presence over there either. My point is this. There are a lot of people that are not very fond of the British, and there's not a few of them, there's many. And if you're a British policymaker, maybe it makes good sense to leave a standing army, a military force in the area to make sure that you've got some stability, to make sure that nobody gets out of line. There's a lot of enemies over there. They do so. But you have to understand something. There was an old English medieval policy. It was known but not really written down. It was unofficial, de facto, however we want to think about it, that emphasized if the king was not currently at war, then you shouldn't be seeing his troops. You definitely should not be housing his troops. Well, the king had won the war. It was peacetime, and here are these redcoats in every street corner. And this became a point of contention with the colonists. They resented those people over there. What they resented even more, and you'll see this in the next lecture that we have, taxes are being raised. We were not used to seeing our taxes raised. That was shock number one. But shock number two was, we're being told the reason that you're seeing more taxation is because we're deeply in debt for the war. As far as we were concerned, we provided the manpower. We provided the supplies. We are square. We don't owe you anything. Without our help, you never would have been able to defeat the French in the first place. So that was very bitterly contested when it comes to don't have the audacity to tax us, because without our help, you never would have been in this position in the first place. So as you can see, the aftermath of the French-Indian War is really the beginning of the American Revolution, because that's where the conflict is really, really going to emerge. Speaking of conflict, Native Americans were very, very nervous as to the British plans for those Western territories. And one in particular individual is really going to make his voice heard, and that is a guy that is a leader of the Fox-Shawnee people in what is now the states of Michigan, Ohio, Indiana. That'd be a guy by the name of Chief Pontiac. What Pontiac is going to do is going to come to be known as Pontiac's Rebellion. As the British are ushering out the French military forces in the Midwest, places like Fort Detroit, Pontiac attacks, and he attacks with this inter-nation response, meaning it's not just his people, it's other nations, other tribes within the region. And that's the essence of Pontiac's Rebellion. They really leave a dent, if you understand what I mean, in the British. They inflict heavy, heavy casualties. And if you happen to be a British policymaker right now, this is the last thing you want. You don't want a long, protracted war that's going to run you even further in debt. And furthermore, this is a very determined enemy. They are fighting for their lives and their ancestral homelands. They are not going to surrender politely. And so what the British do is they make peace. The peace that they make is encompassed in what comes to be known as the Proclamation of 1763. What the proclamation does, this is important, is it hems in the colonists on the East Coast. Okay? It establishes a proclamation line that is on the western edge of the Appalachian Mountain Range. What the proclamation says is there would be no British settlement in what would become Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky. We will keep our people where they're presently existing on the East Coast. We will not see them. We will not allow them to move into your ancestral territory. We'll have access to that territory. We can traverse on it. We can do business with you, pretty similar to what the French were doing. But we have no intentions of colonizing this, which is going to be another very bitterly contested issue going forward. Here the colonists were making this decision at Albany to get involved in the fight, and part of the reason for that was that they felt that they were going to make all this money and get rich moving into those western territories. And the British government, without really even consulting them, jerked the rug right out from underneath their feet and said, hate to burst your bubble, but that's not going to happen. There will be no settlement in this region. And so my point in telling you all of this is that yes, there is a euphoric celebration. Everybody is really, really happy in the aftermath of the French-Indian War. But this celebration was very short-lived. It's not very long that the British are no longer going to be squaring off against the French. Increasingly, they're going to be squaring off against the colonists. It's going to begin with how do we dig ourselves out of debt, and very quickly on in the aftermath of this, it's going to emerge into who is in charge. Who's in charge? Is the British, or are the British in charge? Officially, that seems to be the way that we're going, but unofficially, it's been the American colonists that have been calling the shots for the last 100+ years. We'll pick it up there the next time we meet.